I won't make that joke. The reason for videoing it, Andy, just to get your permission and everything, is it's to capture to all the kids that aren't here, because we're at the end of term. We're week 13. We teach for 12 weeks. A load of people have left. So what I'll do is, are we all right, Blair? To start, do you want me to do a quick hello and welcome? Yeah. So I'll do a thing for the camera. Should I do it on the mic? Yeah, and then I'll hand the mic to Andy. Hi, welcome. This is another SAE in conversation with, and today we've got an old friend of mine who comes from my hometown of Hull, European capital of culture, and this afternoon we're going to talk to Andy Shillito, who's been working with UK band The Darkness for the last 17 years. So what I'll do, I'm just going to have a bit of a random conversation. If you've got any questions, feel free to put your hand up, feel free to ask anything. Andy and I haven't really rehearsed anything. In fact, spent most of our time talking about what's been happening for the last 18 years since we've seen each other. And we'll just try and give you a flavour of what it's like to work on the road with a big band and touring and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to hand the mic to Andy. Big hand for Andy, please. Andy, why are you in Melbourne? What brings you here this sunny afternoon to SAE?
I'm in Melbourne for 3 shows with The Darkness, 3 club shows with The Darkness, and we have a day off today. So I thought I'd come down and meet some of you lovely people and answer some questions.
Now, you've been in the business quite a long time. You're very experienced. I suppose the question that all the students want to know is, how do you get started? What gave you your start? What's your journey?
Well, my journey into the business was that I heard the boys back in town on the radio in 1972, and threw away my cricket bat, my football boots, and everything else, and bought a black bass and stuck a mirrored scratch plate on it and tried to become mixed race, which didn't work. I really just wanted to be Phil Lynott, and I did that for 5 or 6 years. Then I got married and had a family, and so I stopped being a musician. And then I think you probably find, as most people say, it was by accident, Tim. Yeah. I wanted to stay involved in music. I didn't want a small local studio because I'd been a session player, and I'd spoken to a lot of other people who had had little studios and got lots of inexperienced people in and found it, difficult and tiresome. So I was trying to come up with something else. I was trying to come up with some other way of staying involved and working from home. And so there was a local gig in Reading called the After Dark in the Britpop years. They had 3 gigs a week and 300-seater gig. Radiohead, the Manics, Suede, all of them. Pulp, everybody. Was that the Scottish band? The singer finished up being in. Can't remember. But everybody, it was on the circuit, everybody went through there. And the promoter would put on 2 or 3 local bands to bump the numbers up all the time, because in those days Radiohead would only sell 75 tickets. And they do, apparently, the rest are guest list, I hear. And so I thought, well, how can I do this? And I developed a sort of system with a split stage box, a passive split stage box. Talked to a guy who is now Radiohead's engineer, who was had a local studio, and he built me a split stage box. I got a garden hose reel and wrapped some multi-core around it, and I bought a little desk, a little cheap desk, and I stuck it in the back of a Renault 5, and I used to turn up at the gig with a Fostex E16 tape machine and a split stage box and do the 2 local support bands and record all of their set, and then mix it for them pretty cheap, and then they could come in and overdub bits if they wanted. So I kind of got an into recording through the live gig scene at the same time. So I was kind of mixing live shows at home in a control room. And then one day the guy with the PA didn't turn up, and there was a West Indian Rasta sound system in from the West Indian night on the Sunday, and the promoter said, "You've got mics and a desk, and there's a load of speakers in here. Can you make it work?" And I was like, "I don't know." And this West Indian guy said, "Well, it's just like a big stereo. You give me a left and right, and off we go." So that's what we did. And I did my first gig for a band called the Fontaines, who were managed by Hugh Cornwall from the Stranglers. And I had no reverbs. I had one monitor wedge in the centre, no gates, no compressors, 7 microphones, and that was it. A desk and 7 microphones, and one wedge, and we did this gig. And Hugh came up to me afterwards and said, that was great, that was a great mix, it was really clear. You didn't put any reverbs on, did you? And I said, no, I haven't got any. And he said, well, I wish more people didn't have any. And that was kind of how I started, and that kind of formed my path, really, in the way that I learned to do it, and then it became my gig. After that, I bought some speakers off this guy, and the stuff stayed in the gig, and for 3 years that was my gig. And then I guess much like yourself, people would come through. I did a little bit of helping out with Radiohead early days, and then their tour manager got offered something he couldn't do. He set the tour up, asked me to go out. It was opening for the Human League when they did a comeback tour in '96, and the band was signed to EMI, and I took them out in a van and mixed the shows and looked after them, and that was it really. After that I started getting more and more things via the record company, and I liked it. It was I was able to be part of a live music thing and get paid because I wasn't in the band, and the bands were all, band members were on not very much a month, and I was getting paid and paying my mortgage. And the thing I liked about it as a front of house guy was it was still an artistic outlet for me. I still felt like I was being creative, and the other thing that I really liked about it, as against being in the studio, was that it was over in a day. There was no coming back tomorrow and going, oh, maybe the snare drum's a bit bright, or maybe loads of people having an opinion. It was just like, they're on stage, do it. Doors have to open at 7 o'clock. There has to be a show. It has to work. And even if it's not working, as you know from the old days in Spring Street Theatre, it's like it's time to go on. And if it's not working, it's not working. If you can't hear your voice, you can't hear your voice. Just get up there and start doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I liked that element of it. I liked that kind of, you have to get there, and you have to get there now. So
now you're well known for working with the Darkness for 17 years.
Yes.
And that's been an interesting
Yep.
journey. Maybe you can talk us through working with the Darkness from 20 people in a room to 200,000 people in an arena, and just a sense of what those 17 years were about. How did you meet them? How does that relation go?
I met them. I was doing Mel C, and I was doing front of house for Mel C, and that was pretty much the biggest gig I'd had at that point. I'd tried to stop tour managing and doing front of house at the same time.
Now, I just remembered where the last time I met you was when you were doing Mel C and you were rehearsing in the depot in London on Brewery Road.
There you go.
And I was doing Primal Scream in the studio downstairs.
There we are.
There we go. And
Finley. That's where we know each other from.
That's where it was from, yeah.
So I was doing that, and it was shortly after that. And the Mel C gig was a good gig for me. It was profile, and it was good money, and I'd been doing it for about a month, and somebody called me up and said, was I free on a certain date? And I said yes. And they said, there's this band called The Darkness, and I was like, I'd never heard of them. And this guy said, Sam Krieger actually said, first of all, you love it because they're like Thin Lizzy, and second of all, they're going to be massive, and they're coming out of the, they're unseen. They're just going to come out, and it's just going to explode, and they're awesome, and you'll love them. So I was like, okay, well, I haven't done monitors for 8 years, but I'll do it. I'll go down and do it. So I went to do it, and it was at Wembley Arena, opening for Lynyrd Skynyrd and Deep Purple. We had a double bill, and we were on for 20 minutes, and I went up and I thought, well, what am I going to do? What would I do? What would I want if I was in this situation? And I thought I'd want it to sound like it sounds at front of house. So that's what I did. There were a big pair of side fills and a lot of big wedges, and I didn't have much time, and I just ran round and made it sound like front of house.
Fantastic.
I made it sound like a front of house mix, and the band played for 20 minutes and came off, and just came up to me and said that was awesome. And the other thing that I did do, I was conscious that he was running backwards and forwards, so I chased him with his guitar solos. If he was coming over that side of the stage, I'd turn it up.
Oh, so pan it into the mix one,
I was
mix
just
two,
following
mix,
him about, and nobody else had done that. It had a few people, quite a few big monitor engineers, because people were kind of wanting to get on the gig, as we were talking about.
Yeah.
People had smelt that it was kicking off. And I just thought that was the sensible thing to do. You know, I didn't, which I'll talk about later. I think something important in there is that being an ex-musician is knowing what it feels like for them to be up there and what they're feeling and what they might want to pitch from. Or so I was conscious of that, and that's how we met. And they really liked what I did, and I really loved the band. And I was up there thinking, I'm getting, you know, whatever it was, 50 quid for this show, no petrol. And Mel C was something like 300 a day, and you know, cars everywhere, and it was all lovely. And
limos and
it was all very comfortable.
Lots of fruit and flowers in the
But within
room.
30 seconds of this lot coming on stage, I was just like, I was smiling from ear to ear, and I was just like, I'm doing this. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care if it doesn't get big. I remember thinking, this is going to be a lot of fun, and if it gets big, it'll be a real lot of fun. And if it doesn't, it'll still be a lot of fun, so I'm going to do it.
Fantastic.
And I came off and just asked me if I wanted to do it, and I said, yeah, I want to do it. I'll drop everything. Let's go. Now,
you went from monitors. How do you get to front of house and then tour manager and then doing pretty much everything? That's kind of an interesting story.
Okay, so I did 3 months on monitors. The guy who was doing front of house, Pedro for Aurora, who made the first record, I wasn't really a live engineer, and he was tour managing because they did everything themselves. They paid for the album, and they were on a shoestring the whole time. Very clever guys. The two brothers. They knew exactly what they were doing. They planned it. They financed it themselves. They used downtime in studios in the middle of the night, all that sort of stuff. And Pedro was part of that. So Pedro was doing front of house and trying to look after them, and but he was approaching it from a studio point of view. I mean, he had once we got into 1,000-seater gigs, he had 3 mics on the kick drum. One of which was a 414, and it was 1.5 foot outside the kick drum.
Sounds like some of your miking techniques.
I'm joking. Which is fine if you're in the studio, but it's not fine if you're in a little club and it's really loud and the kick drum's feeding back and you haven't got a gate on it. I mean, it was just like he had something like 32 mics on the stage.
Yeah.
And it was getting bad. There was a lot of low-end feedback on every gig, and we were approaching America. By then they'd signed a deal, and it was big in England. I believe wasn't out, but the other two were. And they were doing very well, and the profile was high, and then we were going to America, and the Americans had been to see some shows, and apparently there was a meeting with management where they said either you get somebody else to do front of the house, or we'll get somebody at this side because we can't fly it like this. At which point I went, I want to do front of the house because that's what I do. And just was kind of just particularly was very reticent because they were so happy on stage, and so they said, as long as you can find somebody who is northern and is as good as you are, then you can go to front of the house. So I phoned up Tim Cleesby. I don't know if you know Tim Cleesby, Arctic Monkeys, Sheffield.
Yeah, that's right, from Sheffield. Yeah.
So Tim came and did it, and they loved Tim, and that's how it happened. So I went to front of house, and what was interesting about that was doing monitors for them was really easy. I found it really easy, and just his voice was really easy. So I'm there thinking, and Mel's was really very difficult because she was quite a quiet singer and always in tune, and there was a lot of manipulating had to be. I was constantly kind of watching that vocal all the time. So I'm doing monitors for Justin, just thinking this is going to be a doddle out front. This is going to be a doddle, and I went out front, and it was not a doddle at all because of his range and his vowel sounds, and sometimes he's shouting and sometimes he's whispering, and all of a sudden I was in this world, and my God, the guitars are really loud, and you know, monitors was easy. Front of house is not.
Let's get technical for a moment, because a lot of people. How do you manage that? How do you manage that dynamic range? And you were talking about some of the frequencies you struggle with this specific band.
So what in monitor world it was easy because what he's got good mic technique. So what he would do, so vowel sounds, for instance, like ows and oohs, which he does quite a lot of. All sit around 800 hertz. They're all the ow sounds, and they're fine in the wedges because when he wants to hear that, he makes that noise and it projects. But when you've got that out front through a loud PA and he does that, it's really quite painful, or it doesn't sound very nice because it's really you get that sound and it's really loud and everybody goes, holy shit. So all of a sudden you've got to start looking at that. So the first place anybody really should look is what microphone you're using.
Right.
So I went off of 58 and I went to a Beta 57A, which is just softer and rounder and doesn't respond in those frequencies so much. It has a bit more 200 in it. It's a bit more. It depends a bit more on proximity. So I was then able to say to him, keep it within 2 inches of your face, because if you don't, we're in trouble. And so it was two things really. It was psychologically, I got some more of his confidence because I was paying attention to trying to project what they wanted to project as a band and do it as well as possible. Which is also important in the live thing and in the studio really, is getting your artist confidence that you're trying to help them do what they want to do. That seems to me to separate a lot of engineers and producers from the ones that people like to work with. So there was that, and then I immediately got into realizing that just compressing the vocal with, say, DBX 160 wasn't going to do it, because some of the vowel sounds weren't particularly loud, volume-wise, dB-wise, but they were loud through a big PA. So then I finished up having to go to a dynamic compressor, which was a BSS 901, which I still use, and I've bought 4 of because they don't make them anymore.
They're those little multi-band ones.
Yeah, there are 4 split-band ones. The difference between those and a lot of the software ones is you can actually cut sections of. You can cut it into 4 sections, but that's effectively 8 sections because you can leave 4 alone, and you can. Whereas with a lot of the software ones, you cut it into 4, and if you pull one of the cues tighter, it widens the one next to it. So what I was having to do was go at 800 hertz on a medium cue and compress it a lot with a fairly low threshold. So whenever he hit that vowel sound, it would just compress that and leave the rest of it alone. So it would leave the high frequencies on either side there, and that would warm up the bottom end of his voice. And what's he doing?
What's going on?
Oh, he's doing the thing.
Oh, okay.
He's doing the thing. He still does that. Who was there last night? He did that last night, right? Yeah, that's a clever trick.
Yeah.
And now he's doing that thing. And so there was that. And then he also has I'm trying to think of a word that he uses that isn't a profanity, but there aren't many. But when he does that thing, it gets very 2.5K. It gets very thing. So I would compress at 800, I would compress at 2.5K, and then I would come out of that. I would use that first to level his vocal, and then I would go into a 160, which I still do. Out of that into a 160. And I really use the 160 a bit like a distressor, so that it makes it sound exciting. It's not really to compress it level-wise, it's to make it sound rock and roll and exciting, and that's how I dealt with it in the end. And prior to using either of those techniques, it would just be I'd take loads of 800 out of the PA, so it simply wasn't there. And that, if you want to talk about that later, the way that I EQ systems is quite different to the way that other people EQ systems. And it's based on that, really. So removing frequencies that were annoying is kind of the basis of my technique.
Now, what about treatment? You like to keep it simple?
I do like to keep it simple.
You know what's coming, don't you? You know what's coming.
I don't know why he said that. But yeah, I like to keep it simple, again, because I started simple. I didn't. There weren't schools of audio engineering when I was learning to do this. I didn't know what I was doing really. I was in a gig without any compressors. I didn't have any compressors. I didn't have any gates. I didn't have any graphics. I had a 3-band cheap EQ on a cheap desk. So I learned to be brutal with EQ. And to make things as safe as possible, and that meant starting with the PA. I'm just trying to keep this on point of what you asked. But really, the way that it developed for me was I was very conscious that you're in it. I mean, originally, live sound engineering was called sound reinforcement, which means you're filling in the holes. It's not like being in a studio where you're painting the entire picture. The room is doing something. The room's a speaker in itself. So the first thing I did was listen to what the room was doing and then think, okay, so if it's, you know, if the vocal is, or the snare drum is really loud in the room, I probably don't need it in the PA. What I need to do is build around what is happening in the room, and fill in the bits that are not there, and not add to the bits that are already there. So that became the basis for me kind of cutting things out of PA EQs, and then adding reverbs and stuff. You know, the more of that stuff, I think reverbs are important. They're very important to my shows. Anybody who was there last night will have noticed. But I like to use simple reverbs in a live situation and on records. Things that you can hear. You know, for me, the more expensive a piece of equipment is, the less you can hear what it's doing. So people talk about transparent compressors, and my kind of thing is, well, if it's transparent, why are you using it? You know, it's. I know it sounds odd, but okay, if you want a vocal leveling and you don't really want to hear that it's being compressed, but I want to hear that. I want to hear what it's doing, and if I'm snare reverbs particularly, I will spec an SPX 90 every time.
Yeah.
And people will go, "Oh, it's really noisy," and I'm like, "But you don't hear that in the gig," and I don't care. Because it sounds like I want it to sound.
Yeah,
and I can hear it, and if you turn it up, you can hear it. If I use a Lexicon reverb live, you really struggle to hear it. It's too subtle for me. So that sort of simplicity. The other thing I was talking to somebody about the other night was I use two reverbs. I use a snare reverb and I use a vocal reverb. The snare reverb is generally about 300 milliseconds long and becomes part of the snare sound.
Yeah.
I build it onto the snare, on top of it. It's like a bit of icing on the snare sound. The vocal reverb is there in ballads to make things sound a bit prettier, but just to give it a bit of room, give it a bit of life. But the main point of this is that then I put the toms. Anything else that's going to have reverb in goes in the vocal reverb. And I also do that in the studio, because my thinking there is, if you're creating an atmosphere with a reverb, i.e. you're creating the feeling that somebody's singing in a church, or the band, you know, the vibe of the track that you're mixing is going to be created in a church, let's say, for instance, then everything should be in the same church for me.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to, and it'll knit your mix together. That's one of those things that will knit your mix together, because it's this thing. And I knew people in the 80s who would mix entire tracks and then put the stereo mix through a little room.
Yes.
Because it would just everything's then in the same place. And simplicity. There's less to go wrong. There's less for the listener to listen to subconsciously. The more you've got going on, the more difficult it is to focus on. I think what's lost a lot in the studio, especially these days, because we have so many options with software and plugins and stuff, is, you know, if you think about some of the great, well-known records that you hear at weddings, that you know from the 60s, that you know from the times when you weren't even born. So I don't know, Elvis tracks, Wild Thing. You Really Got Me by the Kinks, My Generation by the Who. They're all badly recorded. They're all pretty badly mixed, but they caught the vibe. The Sex Pistols. They caught they caught an excitement. They caught something. When you listen to that thing, you're drawn in by the feel and what the band were feeling, or what the singer was feeling at the time. You were not drawn in by the quality of the reverb, or the fact that you ducked a frequency on the kick drum off something else, or, you know what I mean? That's not what gets you. That's not what makes people buy thousands of copies of a record. What gets people to buy thousands of copies of a record is being moved when they hear it. And that, for me, it's easier to focus on that the less you do to it. So that's my, and that live, you know, particularly this. There are times when, if he's singing really fast, there was a new track last night, Southern Trains, believe it or not. They have a song complaining about the train system in Britain at the moment.
Only the darkness could
yeah,
do that,
it's called Fuck You Southern Trains. But the lyrics are really fast, and so I just took all the reverb off his voice.
Yeah.
Take all the reverb off. It immediately sounds a bit louder, because it's not being smoothed away by anything. So it's things like that, and it's just quicker for me. It's quicker, and I think, in my experience of all of these years of having been a session player, being in bands, mixed TV stuff, mixed some studio stuff, and a lot of live stuff, you've done your best work in the first few minutes. You know, the decisions you made in the first 10 minutes about that kick drum, they're the ones that are right. They're the ones you should go with. Your ears adjust after the first 10 minutes. Your brain starts to get confused. You get a bit of self-doubt, or you can get overconfident. Go with your first instincts and stick with them, and do it quickly is my thing. And that's something I've learned from live. Is, you know. How
long would you normally get in a, say, big festival? You're headlining a festival. How long are they going to give you to sound check?
Headlining a festival, you would get slightly longer if you turned up at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Right, when no one's there.
When no one's there. You might get an hour at the most if you were headlining. We headline small festivals and Eastern European festivals now, but we do a lot of stuff, and I do a lot of stuff with other people. The standard time is 20 minutes, and you're lucky if you're allowed to hear anything through the PA at all before they start. So, and in the days when Tim and I were cutting our teeth, you didn't have recall desks. You couldn't carry a file around with you. You couldn't just put a file in and your mix would come up. You would need to be able to guess. You'd need to be able to listen to the band before, see what the PA was sounding like, look at what the desk was, and then blind EQ, right? Before just go across the desk and dial it in without hearing anything, and then hold on, and it would start. But you would, you get it in the first 90 seconds. It's not rocket science, It's using your instincts and playing safe, and that's why I like to keep it simple. Because in my experience, it works better anyway when it's simple. It's clear and it's.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to ask the huge, major, massive question. This is the big one: analog, digital. I'll leave it there.
I think they're both. There's pros and cons. He said, sitting on a fence. For me, it's analog every time. It's analog every time.
Why?
Well, it depends how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Okay, let's skim round the outside,
For me, I mean, intrinsically, really, the real reason is because it's real. Because that's, it's air moving, it's molecules moving, it's vinyl as against CD. It's a needle going across vibrating grooves that moves air that hits your eardrums, and that's how we were designed to listen. And any form of digitisation is squared off blocks. It's ones and zeros, and that's not what music is. And music or sound it's an emotive thing for me. And the minute you digitise it, it's no longer emotive, or it loses some of that emotional content. So it becomes synthesised. The advantages, you can walk up to it. I walked into that gig. I'll walk into the gig. We're doing 2 nights in the same place, and my gig will still be on that desk. They'll have a DJ in tonight and a party crowd, and I will be able to walk back in and go, boff, there it is from 2 days ago, and that's great.
How do you feel about plugins and?
Plugins. Okay, my main thing with digital desks, my main gripe with digital desks is when you're mixing a live show and in the studio, when you're mixing a track, if you have an analog desk with a bunch of channels in front of you and meters that you get used to, so you can read it like a book, you can scan it like you can watch TV, and a rack full of comps and gates or whatever it is you've got going on, you can look at them all at once. You can look across them all at once. If I've got a rogue noise at a gig, and I want to find it on a digital desk, I have to select every channel and look at the panel. And while I'm doing that, I can't look at the band, I can't be doing what I'm normally doing at that point in the song. And that's what I have against digital desks, mainly, is you can only do one thing at a time. Even the Digicos, which have 3 screens, you still have to think about, there's a thought gap in between. Whereas when I haven't got it on this tour because we couldn't add the weight into the flight thing, so I didn't bring my 901 rack. But during the gig, normally with the darkness particularly, I will be stood at the desk mixing, looking up, looking down, and I'll be over here with a hand on the threshold of the 160, and in certain words I'll just twist it. I want look, I'll just twist it. You can't do that on a digital desk. You can't have two hands doing two things on a digital desk. So for me, and they don't sound right. They don't sound the same to me. Some of the really high-end ones sound very nice. The Midas ones sound very nice. But still, give me an XL4 any day of the week, because nothing sounds like an XL4. And for me, it's very much like cars. If you get a nicely tuned old Rolls Royce, there is nothing like it. And
yeah, I've got a garage full of them.
I'm sure. It's that thing. There's no. It's like bass cabinets, bass guitar cabinets. I was a bass player. There's loads of new bass cabinets that weigh nothing, but they don't sound like an Ampeg 810. They don't, and they never will. If you want a bass cabinet to sound good, it's got to weigh a ton and be hard to carry. And end of story, or have concrete in the bottom of it. And there is no. You can't synthesize that for me. So I'd prefer analog every time. The other thing with digital desks for me is they waste a lot of the creative process, because with an analog desk, we had something yesterday, in fact. On stage, one of the side fills, the horn wasn't working. Do we all understand what that is? Okay, there was a monitor speaker on stage and the horn wasn't working, so it sounded like this. So I said to the guy, the horn's not working in that side fill. And of course the immediate answer was, well, it was working yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's not working today. So what are we going to do about that? And he went, well, I don't know. Maybe it's the processor, and maybe there's a high pass on and maybe it's routed. If it was an analog desk, you would have got hold of one of these and you would have followed it all the way to where it went and seen if the amp was on. And if it was, or you'd change the cable and then you'd see or you'd plug it into another wedge and fault find like that. Digital desk could be anywhere.
Yeah.
It could be anywhere.
Little grid of blobs or somewhere.
So many ways of soft patching inside a desk. And if I have a gripe against them, a major gripe, that's it.
Yeah.
It's if they're great until something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, you've really had it.
Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about sound engineering. You are also a tour manager for this.
Yeah.
One. How do those two interact, and how do you draw a division that when you're sound checking, you're not dealing with the guest list, and you're not in the production office when you should be upstairs and so on? It's always a difficult one, that one.
It is a difficult one, and there's no right way to do it, I don't suppose. I mean, I've now got an assistant on this who does guest lists and stuff for me, which is why we're able to do it with such a small crew.
How big is your crew on this?
The crew on this is, we have two backline guys. One does drums and bass, and the other one does both guitars. We have a lighting guy, which is a very important part of their show. Yeah. It's an integral part of their show. And I'm big on lights. I'm big on. I always have been ever since I saw Brian Leach do a band called 530 in a club the size of this room, and he brought 3 strobes and some white floodlights, and because he knew all the cues, he knew where all the big chords were and all the choruses, it sounded way better than anything else I'd ever heard in that room. And it was all because it was in sync. It was all because he was using visual dynamics along with the audio dynamics. So I'm big on that, and I think, if anybody's in a production situation, I will now always, the last person I will add to a crew is wardrobe and monitors. The first person I'll add, if we've got the budget, is a lighting guy. For me, front of house guy, tour manager, lighting guy, because the lights make a show. As a big deal last night, right? And we do that on next to nothing. The show. This is different, but we now do a very impressive show on a very cheap lighting rig. So just to go back to the tour managing front of house thing, it's a compromise. I kind of grew up doing it. My inauguration into this business was that in the 90s. There were a lot of people in it just to have fun, stay up late and take drugs and drink and get paid for doing so, and hang out with bands who were hanging out with B-list actors and models and stuff, and it was the Britpop years, and everybody was having a lot of fun. There was a lot of money around, and so there were a lot of people tour managing who weren't getting out of bed at the right time and were getting up with hangovers, and I had a couple of them tour managing me, and I finished up getting them out of bed and driving the van or the people carrier because I didn't want them to drive it. And in the end, I just thought, I might as well do this myself.
Get paid for it.
Yeah, I might as well do this because I'm doing it anyway. And the other thing is, you know, for me as a live engineer, there's too much time in the day. You don't really need, you know, there's a sound check, which if you're lucky, you'll get an hour to tune a system and mess around on your own. Then you've got the band to deal with, who invariably waste a lot of time being funny on stage when they should be, you know, doing something that's important. There's a lot of waiting around. That's a lot of time to get bored. That's a lot of time to get drunk. It's a lot of time to stay in bed. And I thought, well, I could be doing something else with this time. So that's kind of how I finished up doing it. So as the band grew through that, well, they grew. This band is a different example because they got very big very quickly. So we had a big team of people, and I was just doing sound. But I always used to kind of hang about and make sure they were all right. But you just divide it up. I divided it up, and you have to be very vigilant about how you divide your time up. And that also gave rise to me going with this opinion of, you know, if you can't get a kick drum in a gig, if you've done 6 months worth of touring work or you've worked in a club for 6 months, you should be able to sort a kick drum out in 4 to 5 minutes. And if you can't, then you're probably not very good at doing that job. And so you should be able to mix a band in 30 minutes. You should be able to get a sound check off the ground in 30 minutes. And if anybody is thinking about the live thing, don't spend a long time getting it right in sound check, because the room's empty, the band will play differently when they get in front of people, and getting yourself a great mix. The amount of times managements would come up to me in a sound check and go, I can't hear the vocals. And I'd be like, I know, it's because I haven't got them in. Because there's no point. Yeah. And they're like, well, we think, you know, can you show us what it'll sound like? And I'm like, well, no. You know, what I'm doing here is finding out what is going to go wrong in the room, what the room's going to do to me, and guessing from experience what's going to happen when that room fills up with people. Then I'll do a mix. Then we'll do the mix. Halfway through the first song, then we'll have something. But yeah, so that, I don't know, didn't really answer your question. You have to divide the time up. Yeah. And
how would what would a normal day be for Andy?
Now, a normal day for me on a gig day would be I would be out of bed by 9. The lobby call would be 11. We do our lobby calls early. We do our load-ins early. Because one thing I do like to do is have a safety hour everywhere.
Yeah.
Getting to an airport, arriving at a gig, give yourself an extra hour. You can have a blowout on a tyre, you can have a traffic jam, there can be a bomb scare, there can be all sorts of stuff. What you don't want to be doing at a gig is panicking and trying to do things too quickly. So 11 o'clock lobby call, that would be me and the crew going down to the gig. The gear would either be loaded in or we'd be loading it in. I say we, they would be loading it in. And I would be pouring coffee. And they would put the backline up. While they're putting the backline up, which takes them about an hour, I would be tuning the system. After that, I go on stage. We don't carry a monitor guy, which I'm happy to talk about. I never carry a monitor guy if I'm in charge, unless the gigs are really big or we're doing festivals. I would then go on stage and I would EQ all the monitors, regardless of what the house guy says is the vibe, and you know what normally happens in there. All bands are different, all people work different, and you need to know, as a front of house guy, I need to know what's going on that stage. I need to know where the rogue frequencies are. I need to know what's coming off the back of the wedge, because you hear that stuff in a gig, even in a big gig. I've done 10,000 seater gigs where I can hear the centre wedges. I can hear the vocal on what's coming off the back of the centre wedges, and you can't get rid of it once it's started. And as you probably know, try talking to a monitor guy halfway through a gig and going, can you take 400 hertz out the vocal? Because they just don't want to do it, because they're worried that the singer's going to freak. So I take care of the stage, then the back line's up. And then the two backline guys play stuff, and I walk around and put the mix together for the band. Then I go out front and we do the whole thing again. We go through the drum kit and the bass and the guitars out front for me, and then the band turn up, and they are generally speaking happy because I've been working with them for a long time, so I know exactly what they want. And then they play 2 or 3 songs, the same songs. This is a big deal. This is something that I'm very strict on with my bands, is sound checks. We do the same thing in every room. So you play a chorus where everybody sings. You don't play all the way through the song and then get to the end and all start going, I need a bit more of this, or I need a bit. We play a little bit and then you stop, and then one by one you tell me what you need and what you don't need in your monitor system. But at least if you play the same chorus in every sound check, they can tell the difference from gig to gig, and they can tell what's not right. If you just let them randomly play whatever they want, it's like you need a static reference point for things for me. So we do that, we go through the same things, and it's the same for me out front. I can then balance the backing vocals, I can do, certain guitar solos. You focus on what's important. I need to know that, obviously you can hear his solos, you can hear his voice. Then these days there are meet and greets to do, so we'd stop and we do that for 40 minutes. There's a bit of a Q&A, there's some photographs. Then we move what we can from our stage. We don't move a lot, and then you get the support band up. The support band then have to do all of that again. Meantime, the band are upstairs ordering food that has to be eaten a certain time before the show, because they will only eat a certain number of hours before a show, so that has to be timed. Then doors are open. House music, very important. I used to neglect that, but it's become very important. Get your support band on in time, make sure they're off in time. Half an hour changeover, during which that half an hour is very important in terms of house music. A lot of people don't pay attention to that, but it's very important. We have a set pre-roll that I do, it's called a pre-roll, that the band and I put together. And it's not always suitable music. Dan changed it the other night, you may have noticed. It began with the Bee Gees, Jive Talking, Haircut 100. There was a Haircut 100 track in there.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. You would love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, those kind of things. Create a vibe for the band before they go on. Get the room in the right mood before they go on. Maybe edge the volume up a little bit. I'm talking too much, aren't I? We need to.
No, we're going to do 10 minutes. We said we'll do an hour. So
okay.
We'll take some questions.
But that's then the show. Then after the show, listening to the band, either be really happy about it or really be not happy about it. Interesting thing there is, if I think they've had a great gig, and you can probably relate to this from your experience, I'll go into the dressing room and walk in and go, "Great gig, boys," and they'll all go, "It was terrible. We had a terrible time. Can there a fucking thing?" And I'm like, "Really? You played really well." And conversely, they'll play like shit, and I'll go in the dressing room and go, "Wasn't great, was it?" And they'll be like, "We had a great time."
Yeah.
And there's two things I think about that. One is that they're looking at the first 4 rows. They're getting their vibe off the first 4 rows, and if those people are vibing and the band are having a good time with them, we're all good. If the monitors are good, lovely. They're vibing with the first front rows, and they sound good, and they're feeling good, and that's great. For me, what that means is, and it took me a while to work this out, it means they're relaxed. They're too relaxed, and they sound too good on stage. If a band has really terrible monitors, they have to think. If they can't hear what's going on, they have to think really hard about where the counting is and whether they're singing in tune, and they really have to, it's like being in a crisis situation. All of a sudden you focus. So often when they've had a really bad gig, it's actually they've performed a lot better because they've had to be careful, and they've had to look at each other, and they've had to stay connected. So that the post-mortem, and then we all go home, and then we do it again the next day.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I will take any questions if there are any, otherwise I'll think of some.
How do you find that balance of focus and relax to get the ideal performance, I suppose?
Good question. Well, I particularly enjoyed doing Reverend and the Makers. I did monitors again, and I finished up doing Reverend and the Makers. And John, the singer's very volatile character emotionally. He's not aggressive, but he's very volatile emotionally. And I really, for the first time, I was really like, I love in ears because I'm literally in his head.
Yeah.
Literally now, I've literally got control of his mood, but it was important because I could tell when he was having a bad gig, and I could tell when he was singing out of tune. So in that situation, if he was singing out of tune, I'd pull his vocal away, I'd pull it down. So he had to look for it more, and he would think more. So that was one way that I balanced that. There isn't really much you can do about it. You with these boys particularly, I have to get it on stage. I have to get them as comfortable as possible. And for the first time again, I'm sorry, what's your name? You were at the gig. James. You will have noticed that they actually thanked very early on, Justin said, "I'm having a great time. It sounds amazing. What's your name?" to the house monitor guy. And first of all, I was just like, well, he didn't do it, I did. So he was actually really hard work, that guy. But they were very comfortable, and it worked for them. It worked for them. They tend not to relax about it. But yeah, you don't want to give them too much, and you kind of have to get to know them to the extent of knowing what sometimes what they think they want is not. It's like parenting. Sometimes what they think they want is not good for them. And there's a psychological game which you will also learn about in the studio, which is when somebody says, "Can you just turn my thing up?" You go, "Yeah, there you go," and you don't do anything, and they go, "Yeah, that's much better." And you know, there's a bit of that. So you sometimes have to play with that, but you get to know a band, you get to know a performer, and you get to know when they're too comfortable, and then you take it away from them. And how I manage that, if they then say to me, "Can I have?" I'll just go, "No, you can't, because that's all that amp will do, or that's all that wedge will do. And trust me, if we go any further, it's going to feed back." So yeah, you sometimes have to white lie to people.
So continuing that theme then,
Yeah.
but off stage, how much is being the tour manager as babysitting?
A lot.
Yes.
A lot.
Yeah, what's like the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened?
Oh, couldn't possibly, they'd kill me. Just to try and answer both questions then, how much of it is babysitting? What happens, and I used to do this when I was in band, it's again like parenting. These people, no names mentioned, they now have, most of the people that I work with now have families and children, and they are responsible adults at home, and they pay their mortgages, they do, housework, they get the shopping, they put the kids to bed, they take them to school, they teach them how to read and write. The minute they turn up at an airport to go on tour, it's all over. The minute they say me, it's their turn to be children, and it's my turn to. But that's what this game is, that's what this business is. And somebody asked me last night about the whole kind of drug rehab thing that people go through, and she said, "It's such a shame, isn't it, that they can't just be like," and I said, "Yeah, but if they could just be like that, they wouldn't be doing that."
Yeah.
That if these people could, they're no good to me if they're grown up. Does that look like a grown up, sensible man walking about in a Beetlejuice catsuit, clapping with his feet and doing that? That's not a that's not a sensible human being for that hour and a half. So
I'm assuming in the 10 or so years you've been with them, that they've obviously grown as people, but
yeah.
how much do they, I guess, look after themselves now, and how much you have to micromanage things like getting to the airport on time?
You have to micromanage all of that stuff. That's what they pay you for. That's what they pay me for, and that is their privilege, privilege. It's part of their job. If you go and work in a bank, the bank manager doesn't come and serve customers. He sits there and he has somebody who brings him coffee. So he's in the right state of mind to manage the bank, and that's what we're doing here. You're creating an environment for them to go on stage and do that, and feel like rock stars. Which doesn't mean you have to feed them with drugs, and it doesn't mean you have to pamper their egos all the time. Sometimes you do, but again, it's like parenting. There's sometimes you've got to do something that you've got to oppose them and bring their ego down a little bit in order that they don't make fools of themselves. It's a difficult one. People are different, you know. It's like managing any other relationship.
Right. Any more questions? Jeremy.
You've been doing this for quite a long time.
20 years.
Yeah. So, would there rarely be times when you make mistakes during a live gig?
No, never.
Tim never did.
I made lots. Well, that's why I ended up.
Mistakes.
Cut that. Logan, cut that.
And if you were to make mistakes, like, would it make you feel bad about yourself, or would you think it's in the moment, no one will remember?
Interesting the way you asked the question. I love mistakes. You learn from mistakes. There's no such thing as a mistake. They're lessons. And we all make mistakes all the time, naturally. The more comfortable you get, here's a good, how long have I got?
A couple of 5 more minutes. 5 minutes and we're done, yeah.
The biggest mistake I ever made in mixing a gig was we did 2 nights at the Henry Ford Theatre with this lot when they were massive. And the desk was right up in the roof and it was above the PA. So and it was 3 floors, and we were all caning it at the time, and I was running up and down the stairs with a hangover, EQing this PA for 45 minutes, and it was gnarly, high frequency, really painful thing. So I chopped out loads of stuff at 2.5K and 3K, and everything that was EQ, and I just carved it. It was the worst looking graphic you've ever seen. And I was recording all the gigs on CD off the desk at the time. And at the end of the sound check, I would listen to the previous day's gig. And so I popped this thing in, and I thought, well, I can't, you know, you don't want to listen to it with a double set of EQ on, so I would always bypass the EQ while I listened to yesterday's gig. So I bypassed the EQ and listened to this gig, and then went back to the hotel, had a little sleep, came back to do the gig, and Roy Thomas Baker was there.
They produced that.
Yeah, he was knocking about us at the time. Album, and he came running up the stairs going, I've never heard anything like it. This is the most incredible mix I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, okay, good. And then I'm trying to mix. And then Steve Coogan was there. There were loads of people at the gig. Steve Coogan, Dave Grohl, Dave Erringer, loads of people after the gig. They were all in the dressing room going, I've never heard anything like it. That was the clearest sounding gig I've ever heard. And I was just like, wow, that's because I'm great. And I went to bed and I got up the next day and I went in to do the second day and I walked up to the desk and I looked at the graphic and it was still in bypass. Yeah. So all of that bright stuff that I'd taken out I'd put stuff in on the desk. So not only was it as gnarly as it was when it was it was double gnarly. Yeah. Because everything I'd taken out was there and I'd boosted it on the desk. So it was just like, it must have been razor blades. But everybody was raving about the fact that it was, as Steve Coogan said, it was like the kick drum was like glass, like frosted glass at the top, and like a bulldozer at the bottom. It was just amazing. And I was like, wow, I knew it was good. I didn't think it was that good. Yeah. But, you know, great mistake. And I learned loads from that. I learned that I was over EQing systems. I learned lots of things. Mistakes are good, and they keep you on your toes. It's very easy to get comfortable when you get good at something because you do it all the time. Just quickly, the most ridiculous thing I've ever been asked, and this is interesting on the tour manager thing. I'm not going to name who it was because it wasn't an unpleasant thing to do. It was the first time I'd worked with him, and there was a particular coloured car, particular type of car with particular coloured seats. There was a routine that he did on the way to the gig, and I was looking after him for somebody else, and I sat in the back of the car, and he got in, and he had 2 phones, and he was texting away like this, and we were 10 minutes to this gig. We were driving down, and he was reading the paper which had been put there because I'd been told to put it there, and he was on his phone, and all of a sudden my phone went off, and it was his manager. And his manager texted me and said, are you sitting in the back of the car with, And I said, yeah. And he said, stop the car, get out and get in the front. And I was like, and I looked across like that and I was like, how do you, okay. Oh, I see. And he'd stopped texting and was just reading the paper like that. Oh, dear. So I stopped the car and I got out and I got in the front. And he put the paper down and he went, thanks. And I turned around and I went, you could have just asked me. And he said, well, we haven't met each other before and I didn't really know how to deal with it. And I was talking to somebody afterwards, so that was pretty ridiculous because I was sat next to him and he could have just kind of said, you know, he texted his manager. We were in
the UK.
yeah, we were in
and,
LA on the way to
look,
this
I know
massive
this is-
gig,
Yeah.
and he texted his manager who was fast asleep, who then texted me. But somebody said to me afterwards, you know, what a dick. Why was that so important? I said, well, the thing is, that's what he's used to on a gig. That's why somebody told me it was important. And when he got big, he was very young, and he had a lot of, you know, he got very big. There was a lot of money. People create jobs. People create dependencies on them. They create dependencies in them to keep their jobs, and to give themselves a role where, you know, rather than make these. I often say, if these people, you know, if they did grow up, I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah.
And it's that thing, and it was important to this artist because that's for 10 years. That's how he went to a gig. Now, if it's like again, to use the analogy of somebody with a regular job or a more regular job, it's like a bank manager going to work with one shoe on. By the time he got to the office, he wouldn't feel right. So it was a ridiculous request in the terms of, you know, the sensible world, but actually in context, it was perfectly fair. But it seemed really ridiculous. But it was very important because he went on stage that night not quite right.
Right, we've done 1 hour. I promise Andy this would only take an hour.
Hey, I can stay as long as you want. I
So-
love talking about myself.
Yeah, we've got classes and stuff. Could you just show your appreciation? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you very much, Andy.
And if anybody wants to come to the sound check tomorrow or the gig, where do we do this? My email address through you. I'm happy to give my.
Give us a list of your names, guys, and we'll sort it out.
Yeah.
I got told off in the library for playing the darkness before.
Oh, that's a terrible library.
I'm really, really.
And our librarian, would you believe it, is called Van Halen. He's called Luke Van Halen.
Yesterday he wore a t-shirt saying fucking Slayer.
Yeah. So he's a good librarian.
That's why I didn't like the top.
Yeah.
Because he likes Slayer.
Yeah, if anyone wants to go, I would need that information by the end of today. Either get it to Chris, email it to me. If you want to go to the. What time would sound check be on Friday?
Tomorrow we're loading in at 1 o'clock. I mean, if you want to see what happens from the ground up, the band don't come in till 4 o'clock. But you'll see what we do, and you can, you know, I can teach you hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
Because we'll have time. So if you want to do that, if you want to come and see what goes on, 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock, and the venue is.
I tell you what, 1:30. 1:30, and the venue is 170 Russell Street.
170 Russell Street. So anyone's interested in doing a load?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the old Billboard venue. Yeah.
Yeah, 1:30. Come down at 1:30.
Come down at 1:30. Keep out the way. Don't.
It's all right. I'll look after him.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
There's tickets available for the show.
no, it's sold out. But
We'll put you on the guest list if you want to go.
We'll deal with that tomorrow
Yeah.
when you come down.
Yeah.
And you should come and see it. It is an exciting show.
Yes.
It's good fun.
I can't go because I'm going to do another gig on our soundstage, would you believe? So, poor old Tim has to work. Andy, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Really
Thanks for
appreciate it. Thank you. Great stuff, thanks. Is that all right for you, Chris, yeah? Thank you. Thank you so much. The main thing is we just... Yeah.
Get to my geek questions, you're lucky.
Yeah.
Your gig questions.
My geek questions.
Oh, your geek questions, yeah.
What are your gig questions?
Tom's guitar line.